Declaring independence. Good historians share with magicians a talent for elegant sleight of hand. In both professions, the manner of execution conceals much of the work that makes the performance possible. Like the magician's trapdoors, mirrors, and other hidden props, historians' primary sources are essential to their task. But the better that historians are at their craft, the more likely they will focus their readers' attention on the historical scene itself and not on the supporting documents. Contrary to prevailing etiquette, we have gone out of our way to call attention to the problems of evidence to be solved before a historical narrative is presented in its polished form. As yet, however, we have not examined in detail the many operations to be performed on a single document. What at first seems a relatively simple job of collecting, examining, and cataloging may become remarkably complex, especially when the document in question is of major importance. So let us narrow our focus even more than in the previous two chapters by concentrating not on a region, Virginia, or a village, Salem, but on the one document. The document in question admittedly carries more import than most, yet it remains brief enough to be read in several minutes. It also has the merit of being one of the few primary sources that virtually every reader of this book already will have encountered, the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration, of course, is one of the most celebrated documents in the nation's history. Drafted by Thomas Jefferson, adopted by the Second Continental Congress, published for the benefit of the world, memorialized in countless patriotic speeches, it is today displayed within the rotunda of the National Archives, carefully encased in a container filled with helium to prevent any long-term deterioration from oxygen. Every schoolchild knows that Congress declared the colonies independent by issuing the document on July 4th, 1776. Nearly everyone has seen the painting by John Trumbull that depicts members of Congress receiving the parchment for signing on that day. So, the starting place is familiar enough, yet there is a good deal to establish when unpacking the facts about such a seminal document. Under what circumstances did Jefferson write the Declaration? What people, events, or other documents influenced him? Only when such questions are answered in more detail does it become quite clear that a few of the facts, quote-unquote, enumerated in the previous paragraph are either misleading or incorrect, and the confusion begins in trying to answer the most elementary questions about the Declaration. The creation of a text. In May 1776, Thomas Jefferson traveled to Philadelphia, as befit a proper gentleman, in a coach and four with 2 attending slaves. He promptly took his place on the Virginia delegation to the Second Continental Congress. Even a year after fighting broke out at Lexington and Concord, Congress was still debating whether the quarrel with England could be patched up. Sentiment for independence ran high in many areas, but by no means everywhere. The greatest reluctance lay in the middle colonies, particularly in Pennsylvania, where moderates like John Dickinson still hoped for reconciliation. Such cautious sentiments infuriated the more radical delegates, especially John and Samuel Adams of Massachusetts. The two Adamses had worked for independence from the opening days of Congress, but found the going slow. America, complained John, was a great unwieldy body. It is like a large fleet sailing under convoy. The fleetest sailors must wait for the dullest and the slowest. Jefferson also favored independence, but he lacked the Adamses' taste for political infighting. While the men from Massachusetts pulled their strings in Congress, Jefferson only listened attentively and took notes. 33 years old, he was the youngest delegate, and no doubt his age contributed to his diffidence. Privately, he conversed more easily with friends, sprawling casually in a chair, with one shoulder cocked high, the other low, and his long legs extended. He got along well with the other delegates and performed his committee assignments dutifully. The debate over independence seemed to sputter on fitfully until late May, when Jefferson's colleague Richard Henry Lee arrived from Williamsburg, Virginia. Lee was under instructions from the Virginia Convention to force Congress to act. On Friday, June 7th, he rose in Congress and offered the following resolutions: that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, that it is expedient forthwith to take the most effectual measures for forming foreign alliances, that a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration and approbation. On Saturday and again on Monday, moderates and radicals earnestly debated the propositions. They knew that a declaration of independence would make the breach with England final. The Secretary of Congress, Charles Thomson, cautiously recorded in his minutes only that, quote, certain resolutions were, quote, moved and discussed. The certain resolutions, of course, being treasonous in the extreme. Still, sentiment was running with the radicals. When Delegate James Williams of Pennsylvania announced that he felt ready to vote for independence, Congress set the wheels in motion by appointing a 5-member committee to prepare a declaration to the effect of the said first resolution. The events that follow can be traced, in bare outline at least, in a modern edition of Secretary Thompson's minutes. From it, we learn that on June 11, 1776, Congress constituted Jefferson, John Adams, Ben Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston as a committee of 5 responsible for drafting the Declaration. Then for more than 2 weeks, Thompson's journal remained silent on the subject. Only on Friday, June 28th, does it note that the committee, quote, brought it in draft of the Independence Declaration. On Monday, July 1st, Congress resolved itself into a, quote, committee of the whole, in which it could freely debate the sensitive question without leaving any official record of debate or disagreement. Thompson's minutes did not record the activities of committees. On July 2nd, the committee of the whole went through the motions of reporting back to Congress, that is, to itself. The minutes note that Richard Henry Lee's resolution, then being read in formal session, was agreed to. Thus, the official journal makes it clear that Congress voted for independence on July 2nd, not the 4th, adopting Richard Henry Lee's original proposal of June 7th. When John Adams wrote home on July 3rd to his wife, Abigail, he enthusiastically predicted that July 2nd would be remembered as the most memorable epoch in American history. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other for this time forward forevermore. As it turned out, Adams picked the wrong date for the fireworks. Although Congress had officially broken the tie with England, the declaration explaining the action had not yet been approved. On July 3rd and 4th, Congress again met as a committee of the whole. Only then was the formal declaration reported back, accepted, and sent to the printer. Thompson's journal notes, the foregoing declaration was, by order of Congress, engrossed and signed by the following members. Here is the enactment of familiar to everyone, the engrossed parchment, one written in large, neat letters, beginning with the bold letters, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, and concluding with the President of the Continental Congress's signature, so flourishing that we still speak of putting our John Hancock to paper. Below that, the signatures of 55 other delegates appear more modestly inscribed. If mention of the declaration in Thompson's minutes concluded with the entry of July 4th, school children might emerge with their memories reasonably intact. But later entries of the journal suggest that in all likelihood, the declaration was not signed on July 4th after all, but on August 2nd. To muddy the waters further, not all the signers were in Philadelphia, even on August 2nd. Some could not have signed the document until October or November. So the upshot of the historian's preliminary investigation is that 1. Congress declared independence on the 2nd of July, not the 4th. 2. Most members officially signed the engrossed parchment only on the 2nd of August. And that 3. All signers of the Declaration never met together in the same room at once, despite the appearances in John Trumbull's painting. In the matter of establishing the basic facts surrounding a document, historians are all too ready to agree with John Adams's bewildered search of his recollections. What are we to think of history when in less than 40 years such diversities appear in the memories of living men who were witnesses? Yet, even with the basic facts in place, many important points remain to be answered about the Declaration's creation. Although Jefferson drafted it, what did the Committee of 5 contribute? If the delegates made changes during the congressional debate on July 3rd and 4th, for what purpose? A historian would want to know which parts of the completed document were most controversial. Surviving copies of earlier drafts could shed valuable light on these questions. The search for accurate information about the Declaration's drafting began even while the protagonists were still living. Some 40 years after the signing, both Jefferson and Adams tried to set down the sequence of events. Adams recalled the affable and diplomatic Jefferson suggesting that Adams write the first draft. "I will not," replied Adams. "You shall do it," persisted Jefferson. "Oh, no. Why will you not do it? You ought to do it." "I will not." Reasons enough, and Adams ticked them off. Reason first. You are a Virginian, and a Virginian ought to be at the head of this business. Reason number 2, I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular. You are very much otherwise. Reason third, you can write 10 times better than I can. "Well," said Jefferson, "if you are decided, I will do as well as I can." Jefferson, for his part, did not remember this bit of diplomatic shuttlecock. In a letter to James Madison in 1823, he asserted that the Committee of 5 met, and they unanimously pressed on myself alone to undertake the draft. I consented, I drew it, but before I reported it to the committee, I communicated it separately to Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams, requesting their corrections. And you have seen in the original paper now in my hands, with the corrections of Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams interlined in their own handwriting. Their altercations were 2 or 3 only, and merely verbal, that is, changes of phrasing, not substance. So far, so good. Jefferson's original paper, which he endorsed on the document itself as the original rough draft, is preserved in the Library of Congress. Indeed, the draft is even rougher than Jefferson suggested. As historian Carl Becker pointed out, the inquiring student coming to it for the first time would be astonished, perhaps disappointed, if he expected to find in nothing more than the original paper, with the corrections of Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams interlined in their own handwriting. He would find, for example, on the first page alone, 19 corrections, additions, or erasures, besides those in the handwriting of Adams and Franklin. It would be probably seem to him, at first sight, a bewildering document, with many phrases crossed out, numerous interlineations, and whole paragraphs enclosed in brackets. These corrections make the rough draft more difficult to read, but in the end, also more rewarding. For the fact is, Jefferson continued to record on this copy successive alterations of the Declaration, not only by Adams and Franklin, but by Congress in its debates of July 3rd and 4th. Thus, by careful comparison and reconstruction, we can accurately establish the sequence of changes made in one crucial document from the time it was first drafted, through corrections in committee, to debate and further amendment in Congress, and finally on the engrossed parchment familiar to history. The changes were not slight. In the end, Congress removed about a quarter of Jefferson's original language. 86 alterations were made by one person or another, including Jefferson, over those fateful 3 weeks of 1776. Now, I recommend if you pause this and go to the video posted, there is a reenactment of a possible conversation between Jefferson, Franklin, and John Adams as they debate whether or not to include issues of slavery in there. Most of that video is based on notes of the three gentlemen in question. All right, now proceed to the digital history reading, which is more straightforward in language, and so I'll leave you to read it on your own.